And how are you today, Matthew?
Great, thanks, Chris. Always great to be
That's
chatting
all right.
about technology. Always gets me excited.
Now, if you don't have time to wait around for your phone to charge, Chinese electronics company, how do you say it again, Matthew?
Xiaomi.
Xiaomi says it can now fully charge a phone in 8 minutes at 200 watts.
Yeah, that sounds quite incredible, doesn't it? Because back in the old days, Chris, we used to leave our phones overnight to charge up. You'd go to bed at night, plug it in. If you hadn't plugged it in that night, you'd wake up in the morning, oh no, it's not charged. What am I going to do? Well, getting down to 8 minutes, you get to the point where you don't really care about when you charge it. You just plug it in for a few minutes here and there, and that's it. They have been showing off some of their credentials lately, and Xiaomi believes that this is one of the areas they can really make a difference in terms of getting their phones ahead of the rest of the market. And Xiaomi's going quite well. It's only 11 years old, and they're up there in the top 5 smartphone manufacturers across the world. And again, this sort of charging demonstration is something they've often worked on. It also includes wireless charging, which is pretty standard for a modern phone these days, but it can fully charge your phone wirelessly in 15 minutes. So that's pretty impressive as well. And there's a bit of battleground going on here at the moment. So Oppo is always trying to outdo Xiaomi, and they're always trying to outdo each other. Oppo recently came out with their fastest charger, which is last year. They came out with theirs. They had a 4,000 milliamp hour battery charged in 20 minutes with their 125 watt system. So Xiaomi thought they better do better than that. So the battlegrounds are there, and I love it when companies get into these battle back and forth trying to outdo each other, because for you and I as consumers, it just means that we get better products.
And do you like to shop for local products? Well, do you know that just how local various products are? This new Australian app can show shoppers just how local their products are.
It is a big thing that people do want to see where their products are coming from, where the company is owned. Often those iconic Australian brands we know and love are actually owned by overseas companies. And this particular company got to the stage where they said, you know what, we need some way of being able to show people exactly where they're coming from. And so they've got a score out of 100. When you scan a barcode, it'll give you a score out of 100. And that score is based on where the products in that particular product come from and where the company's owned. So it's a combination of those two. Now, the app is a classic Australian name. It's called Australian, as in I'm Australian, with a very bogan sort of accent. Strayan is the app. And I love the idea of it. And again, it's one of those things that we often talk about it, but there's no real way knowing typically of where a product's made, where all the components come from, and this is the app that gives you that. There's also some recent surveys that show that people are much keener to buy Australian or buy products from companies that are here in this country. And so a survey a couple of years ago had the desire for purchasing from Australian companies at 87%. The most recent survey had that up to 93%. And the only downside I find, Chris, is sometimes people say they want to buy Australian, and then when an overseas product is a little bit cheaper, they suddenly jump ship and go across to that.
And Matthew, Fitbit will soon be adding snoring detection to its devices.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on in this whole wearables market to try and keep us fitter and healthier, or maybe tell us how unfit and unhealthy we are. I'm not sure which way it goes. But the latest feature from Fitbit is a snoring detection. So you can wake up in the morning and it will give you information about your sleep quality, how long you slept for, and also how much you snored during the night, including how loud you were. So when my partner jabs me in the ribs and says you're snoring too loud, I always say, no, I think you were just hearing it too loud. But now that argument will be out the window, because Fitbit will say you're snoring at 72 dBs or whatever it might have been. And I think the important thing with these sort of features, Chris, is really about making sure that you take some notice of it and then go to the professionals. We've all used Dr. Google from time to time, but when you look at this, if you've got high heart rate notifications or an ECG on your watch or too much snoring, it might be indication of some other things that may be some professionals, maybe, people that have studied for years and looked at the human body for a long time. Maybe some of those professionals might need to look at it. So that's the only warning I would give here. Sure, great, have a look at that, get the information from your Fitbit, but then do something with it is the important part.
And Matthew, police thought they were raiding a drug growing operation. Instead, it was illegal activity of another kind altogether. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the police in the UK were looking at an industrial shed just outside Birmingham, and they looked at all the activities going on around this industrial shed. And they were convinced it was a marijuana growing operation. They saw heat maps, they had drones fly over and they saw heat maps coming out of the industrial shed, which is typical of lights and heat being put into somewhere where they're growing marijuana. They had people coming and going on a regular basis to it. They had various pipes or various leads going in and out of the building. They thought, well, this is pretty obvious here. We just have to get the drug squad together and go and do a raid and catch some people with drugs. Now, they did the raid. They had the drug squad together, and when they got in, they didn't find any drugs at all. They didn't find any plants. They found about 100 ant miner machines. Now, ant miners are machines specifically used to mine bitcoins. And they were generating all this heat in this particular building with all those computers running, high-end computers, and they were working away trying to mine new bitcoins to make money out of that. And so their first impression was, we got this wrong. This isn't an illegal operation growing drugs. This is just someone mining a whole bunch of Bitcoin. But then they looked a bit further and realised that they were stealing the electricity to do that. So even though they were expecting a drug raid, they found that they were still getting someone doing something illegal. But in stealing the electricity, one of the problems with mining Bitcoins is it actually costs you more in electricity than what you get out of mining a Bitcoin. But if you're stealing the electricity from someone else, well, obviously that negates the cost of that income and away you go.
Here's an interesting one for when we go on a plane. We've all flown on a plane knowing that the plane was flying despite two pilots sitting in the cockpit. Are you comfortable with the plane flying without two pilots in the cabin?
The thing that comes to my mind, Chris, is the old Flying High movies when the blow-up dummy, when they put it on autopilot and the blow-up dummy pops up in there. And I think we are quite comfortable. Most people are comfortable with the fact that the plane is doing most of the flying. But what about if there was no one in there? And that's the scary part. There's a company in America at the moment that's doing a conversion of a whole bunch of King Air planes. So we're not talking about 747s or Airbuses. We're talking about fairly small King Airs. And at the moment, they're using them not for carrying passengers. They can't get approval from the FAA to carry passengers at this stage. But what they will be doing with them are things like, for example, in a bushfire, they have planes up high that are looking at where that bushfire is going to direct the tankers, or for general sort of monitoring of the ground or monitoring of things that might be happening on the ground. You might have planes just go up and fly a set route and come back down. So for things like that, they believe they're at the point now where they can have a fully autonomous aircraft. And we're not talking about drones. We're not talking about someone sitting in a bunker somewhere flying that aircraft. We're talking about that aircraft taking off, doing its route, and then landing again, all of its own accord. There will be monitoring externally, but that one person monitoring might be monitoring 10 planes and only looking out for something that goes wrong on one of those planes. Sounds a bit scary. The next stage after that is cargo. So with all the freight that's travelled around the world, there's usually only a couple of pilots in the plane and away it goes. And the third stage, and I think it's probably a good 10 years away, is when we get onto a plane and there's literally no one in the cockpit.
Very interesting topics this morning, Matthew. You have a good week. Thanks very much for joining us. Of course, people can go over to YouTube. Talk next week, mate.
Thanks, Chris.